Hey folks, Matt Boyle here for Breitbart News. We're in Miami, Florida. We're going to go talk to Senator Rubio about a massive swing we saw in the Hispanic vote in November 2020 towards President Trump and Republicans. We're also going to talk about corporate influence in American politics and what the Republican Party needs to do about it. Let's go see what he has to say. Hey Senator, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good. Senator, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you, man. Thank you for letting us come by today.
Anytime.
The one about...
As you can see, my mom, she always loves these antiques. So as you see, we have a Captain Regal, the firefighters.
Is that a real thing? Yeah, Havana firefighters hat.
And she's always getting real antiques and real stuff because it kind of brings us our memory back from Cuba for our families and for our customers. So when they sit down, they reflect back on why we came here, what the memories are, but also how blessed we are to be in this country as immigrants and really having the American dream.
I always tell people, if Cuba was 90 miles from some other country, we'd be in bad shape. You know, you wouldn't own this restaurant, you know, and your family wouldn't have done what it's been able to do.
We're here at Sergio's in Miami. Chain restaurant, family restaurant's been in business since 1975. They got 6 locations, 450 employees. They were recipients of your Paycheck Protection Program assistance at the beginning of the pandemic. Tell us why that program was so important.
Well, because it was about workers and it was about work. A lot of attention is paid to the small businesses that were saved by it, and that's very legitimate. But when we sat down and we said, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen is millions of people who work for a small business get laid off, spend months not working, so now collecting unemployment, and it's corrosive. It's destructive to your life, to your person, to your. Work is about a lot more than just a paycheck. That's why it's called the Paycheck Protection Program. We wanted to keep as many, in a time of like tremendous uncertainty, we wanted to keep as many people attached to their employer as possible. And of course that helped the small business. And it was an enormous success. And the Trump administration deserves a lot of credit. They bent over backwards to make it work. It's unfortunate because you're watching what's happening with it now. You know, since January, it's been a catastrophe. I mean, the Biden administration, the new SBA people, they're terrible. I mean, what they've done to the program. I mean, they've continued to change the rules. They've injected, you know, all kinds of crazy new requirements in it that have confused everybody. But I can tell you, by and large, PPP was, I think, the most valuable and effective government intervention in a time of crisis that we've seen, and certainly in my lifetime.
No one understood how long it was going to take during this pandemic, and that gave us a lifeline to not only hire and keep our employees, but also figure out what to do for sales.
I think one of the things we've forgotten in this country is that work is about more than just a paycheck. It's about dignity, right? You get up and these people take pride in the work they do. They're not here like, you know, miserable. It gives them a place to be and something to do. Human beings were created to work and to be productive. When you take that away, it's corrosive. You see what it does to neighborhoods. You see what it does to families. And so to keep them connected. And the other thing we thought about is, all right, if these guys lose 90% of their employees, when it's time to reopen, how are they going to get them back?
And you're the one who conceptualized this idea in the U.S. Senate, right? You're the guy who came up with it. You started working on this as far back as February in 2020.
January.
Yeah.
We saw I remember we were in the middle of we were wasting our time on the floor on this impeachment trial, but before noon when it started at 1 o'clock, we were already talking about, hey, if this pandemic hits, we need to help get small business into the supply chain issues, right? Because pandemic's hitting, we're going to see disruption. How are we going to make up the supply chain losses? This is a good time to build up the capacity of small businesses. So we were already thinking about it. And then when the pandemic hit, we just kind of shifted over and created this instead. We realized it was going to be a lot bigger than just supply chain. So look, it was bipartisan. Frankly, I mean, Democrats worked with us on it at that moment in time. And I'm proud of that because they can't get anything passed if it's not bipartisan. And, you know, Steve Mnuchin deserves a lot of credit. He was a big part of it, you know, and other people that were helping us with it. So, but our office, I named it, the Paycheck Protection Program. I came up with that brand, yeah. But a lot of the ideas, I mean, our staff deserves a lot of credit. And so too does Senator Collins and the other people that helped us with it, to be fair, you know, Senator Cardin. It was a time where I think it worked the way it was supposed to work, government. You know, we were thinking about people, not about politics.
Right, and this is at a time at the beginning of the pandemic when the government's literally asking people to stay home. They're asking people to not go to work, and so they're trying to figure out how do we get them, you know, so that they get to keep their job when we do tell them to go back. Now, the government has lifted a lot of these restrictions. People want to go back to work now across the country, but we have kind of like the inverse problem, because the other big thing that
get this on. Oh God.
Oh my.
This is all keto, right? This is all low carb.
Oh my.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll have a little
Yeah.
coffee. Thank you. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, what is this small cup for what?
This is colada. And then
Colada and then more here. Got it. We're all set.
got it.
Okay, so it's the same thing.
Yeah. That works.
So your point was right? That's what I always tell people. I had a lot of people say, well, why is government involved in all this? I said, we're telling people they can't open their business. If I tell you Sergio's, government wants Sergio's, we want to take over Sergio's because we need it for a public purpose, that's called a taking. We got to compensate them for it. If you tell them we have to close you because of pandemic, that's a taking. It was the equivalent of a taking in the way I viewed it at the time. But for me, honestly, I knew the airlines were going to get their money, all these big companies were going to get their money, but what was going to happen to these small businesses? Millions of them would have collapsed. They would have been gone forever. And instead of being at Sergio's today, we'd be eating, at Amazon's new Cuban restaurant. They would have been taken over by the big businesses.
We are in a crisis now, getting restaurants all over the country and throughout industries, and we're a little bit short-staffed, and we'll continue to adapt and like an entrepreneur, figure out how to make it through this crisis. And it's something that we are increasing pay, healthcare benefits, 401ks, and we'll continue to figure out what we can do during this crisis.
So I always tell people, it's not me that's saying it, it's I'm hearing it from people. So when you go hire someone, maybe someone that used to work for you or whatever, what do they say to you?
I mean, we're just not getting applicants coming
right.
in. That's the hardest part. The frustrating part is that when our managers come in, they might get 1 or 2 interviews for the week, and they're super excited because the number one thing that we're hearing from our employees is burnout, that they can't take it anymore. They can't work 6-7 days a week. We have a lot of friend restaurants that are closing certain days because really the heroes in this story that are not being talked about are the people that are actually working.
We've seen mega corporations really engaging in political activity in a significant way, championing woke leftist ideology. Corporations are kind of running away from the Republican Party. Republicans are moving away from corporations. You've been talking about what you call a common sense capitalism. Can you tell us about that? Because I think that's kind of almost the answer to woke corporatism.
Yeah, and a couple points. The first on woke corporatism. Companies, people, they have a right to believe whatever they want, right? The problem is it's hypocritical and biased. So when, not even Chick-fil-A, when its founders believed in something, people wanted to boycott Chick-fil-A. And I didn't see the media here complaining about that. And the same is true with these companies, they're hypocrites. So when Nike and Apple, all these guys, they make billions of dollars and do business. They'll bend over backwards and do whatever the Chinese ask, anything, because they want to make money over there. And then they come here and they say, okay, let's not say anything about Uyghur Muslims in work camps, worked to death, killed, genocide, but we'll boycott an American state whose elected officials passed a law through its legislative constitutional process. That's complete hypocrisy. You're going to be in the United States and criticize this country, but then say nothing about these other countries. So that's number one. The second point, you ask about common sense capitalism. I believe in capitalism 100%. And I said this the other day, I grew up as an orthodox capitalist, if it was a religion, orthodox capitalism. And I think over time, what you learn and what you start to see is the world has changed. What's good for an American mega corporation is not necessarily good for America in many cases in this new economy. And so I think the market is the best place to go, the best way to go, because it's going to give you the most efficient outcome. The problem is, what if the most efficient outcome is bad for America? What if it is more efficient to send jobs? It is more efficient to send jobs to cheaper labor in another country, but it's not good for Americans. So what is our role? To just say, well, that's the way the market works, or is our goal to work for Americans? And that's what common good capitalism is. It's market capitalism, but when the outcomes are not good for the country, it's our obligation to step in and ensure that we incentivize an outcome that's in the common good. That's what, frankly, that's what Operation Warp Speed was.
You're referencing the Georgia law, obviously here, right? Where Georgia passed an election integrity law after the 2020 election. And then we saw a number of different companies backlash against Georgia. Obviously, Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game out of Georgia to Colorado. So they're going there instead. The Major League Baseball has benefited from a government-provided antitrust exemption. You were one of the first senators to call this out and say, okay, they have a right to believe what they want to believe. If they don't like this law in Georgia, they have a right to do whatever they want to do. But why is the government giving them some kind of a major benefit like this? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the points we said to these guys. they benefit from all sorts of U.S. government policies, right? That put them in the position that they're in. But it's more than that. I mean, Major League Baseball has no problem going into the Dominican Republic and bringing in some 16 or 17-year-old to play baseball in the United States. They wanted to open up academies in Cuba. So they have no problem coming to us. I remember during the Trump administration that Major League Baseball was reaching out to us in the Trump administration to get them to let them do business with the Cuban government, open up an academy in Cuba, figure out a way to get Cuban baseball players here.
By the way, there's a lot of great Cuban baseball players.
Sure,
right?
But these guys wanted to create a system where they could bring the Cuban baseball player and then pay the Cuban government a fee. In essence, trafficking these people and paying them a fee, and they wanted us to like sign on and go along with that. So that was the pitch that Major League Baseball had. So they have that, but then they're going to come here and moralize. And by the way, boycott Atlanta. They didn't hurt the state. They didn't hurt the state legislature in Georgia. They hurt small businesses in Atlanta, a large percentage of whom are minority owned, who now, we're counting on the All-Star game to help make up some of the losses they've had during the pandemic. They took the game away from them, and so it's totally hypocritical. Just another example of that. And I think when you look at that antitrust thing and you ask yourself, why is government putting these entities in a favored position? We as Republicans, I think, have to start realizing that we're not anti-corporation. We're free enterprise people, but we don't have any special obligation. Just because it's good for a major corporation doesn't mean it's good for the economy. They are not necessarily spokespersons for what's good for the economy.
Obviously, one of the problems that we're facing as a conservative movement is big tech censorship. We're seeing, the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., really crack down on conservatives and censor and so on and so forth. There's some Republicans and a lot of Democrats who are suggesting, okay, well, let's give big media companies an antitrust exemption to try to fight back against this, so they can collectively bargain and pressure the big tech companies to pay them. Sounds great in theory, but there's concerns that a lot of these media companies would go and cut their own deals. They would leave people like Breitbart or other conservative media out of it. What do you think about that type of a thing? I mean, if we're talking about getting rid of antitrust exemptions for MLB, why would we go and give one to the media?
Well, two things about that. The first thing, the problem with tech is it's not that they want to censor people necessarily per se, because I think that we already have censorship even in non-tech media in what they report and in the narratives they pursue. The issue is the monopoly. They are now the gatekeepers to the new public square. It's the concentrated amount of power in the hands of 5 or 6 big companies. There's 5 companies in America. If they decide to get together, Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter all get together, they can shut you down. I mean, they can shut anybody. They can shut down the President of the United States. They can shut down anybody. And that's a lot of power concentrated in the hands of unelected, unaccountable individuals to completely cut somebody off from the public square and wipe you out. So that's the big problem there. And then in case of the collective bargaining thing, yeah, it sounds interesting, except it's exactly what you said. And that is, you could have, some of these newspapers that are locally owned are actually owned by a conglomerate. They'll cut their own deal, and they'll say, you're right, we are we're an accredited, reputable news organization, collectively bargain with us for our content, but everybody else who challenges our narrative or our views, they get a different deal. You could even not even promote their information if you want. So, like I said, the intent is good. I think in practice, it opens the door to greater collusion between big media and big tech.
So, Senator, we're here in Miami. One of the interesting things that happened in this last election in November was a huge shift to the right among the Hispanic population here in Miami and Florida. We also saw it a little bit in Texas as well. Why do you think that happened? Why do you think that I think it was 20-something points, and it wasn't just for President Trump, it was down ticket as well. I mean, we saw newly elected members of Congress, Carlos Jimenez, we saw Maria Salazar. Why are we seeing this shift to the right in the Hispanic population?
Because these are communities that are made up of people that value common sense wisdom and working class values. I mean, that's what their life is built on. And those are two things that the left has completely abandoned. And you hear a lot of talk, is it about socialism? Socialism is a part of it. Socialism is a part of the common sense part of it. Like, in their mind, it's like, if I were to sort of step in the shoes of one of these folks that maybe voted for Obama in 2012, but then voted for Donald Trump in 2020, they would say to you, look, I came from a socialist country, I fled it, why the hell would we do that here? It makes no sense to them. And so you see Democrats stand up and say, oh, I'm not a socialist. No, you're not. You don't brand yourself as a socialist, but you support socialist things. and you support socialist leaders and socialist politics. And so it just makes no sense to them. So there's this sort of total abandonment of common sense that for everyday people who don't sit around all day on Twitter, I guarantee you, nobody that works here spends all day on Twitter reading what some guy with a blue check on him tells them they need to think.
I think that's probably fair.
Right, they live life based on common sense, and the left has completely abandoned that. I think President Trump was doing a lot of things that were common sense, and in their mind made all the sense in the world, and they don't understand why the other side's against it. And then working class values. Most of these people here don't care what you do with your life. They don't want to tell you how to live your life, who to marry, who to love, and so forth. But I mean, you're asking them to abandon, 3,000-4,000 years of accumulated human wisdom because a handful of crazy professors have convinced people that everything we knew that was true is no longer true on gender, on this, on that. So, I mean, these guys just got turned off by all that. And then I think it just accelerated through the summer with the pandemic and the rioting and all of that. And I think that shift is permanent, unless we Republicans go back to being who we used to be, which is, then we give these people no political home.
Next year, you're running for re-election here in Florida. So we've seen now Val Demings, Democrat Congresswoman from the Orlando area, and then she's announced that she's running. We've seen Stephanie Murphy, another Democrat from the Orlando area, announce that she's considering running. We don't know which one of them is going to emerge from their race to the left, if you will, in their Democrat primary, but tell us about your thoughts on your at least one, likely two opponents on the Democrat side. What's your message going into your re-election?
Well, first of all, I'm looking forward to it. I think elections are a great time to reaffirm who you are and what you're about. It gives energy to your work, and it's an exciting opportunity to go to people and say, this is what I've done, and this is what I'll do if you send me back. I wasn't going to go unopposed. They got to run somebody. And, so these people, one, they're running because they don't think they're going to have a district, or they're running because they've been promised some position by Biden if they lose. So whatever it may be, bottom line is, whoever my opponent is, it's going to be someone who's going to vote for Chuck Schumer to be the Senate Majority Leader. It's going to be someone who thinks that minorities like me and others that work here are incapable of producing a photo ID to go vote, that's somehow we're not smart enough to produce a photo ID, that's discriminatory. It's going to be somebody who thinks that the federal government should pour trillions of dollars into doing all of these energy changes that China's not doing, that leaves people unemployed, that continually and constantly hurt working people. Look at all these people that worked on the pipeline, Keystone Pipeline. These are all at the stroke of a pen, unemployed, lost their jobs. It's going to be radical people that won't speak up against the most radical elements in their party because they're afraid of it. And on, the list goes. So I look forward to that contrast. And then the biggest contrast of all is I look forward to talking about my record. I have passed 36 bills, and that requires bipartisan work to do it. And not 36 like naming post offices, meaningful things. The VA reform bill that one of the first bills President Trump signed, increasing the child tax credit, paycheck protection program. My work on China is so effective. I was banned and sanctioned by China. So I look forward to telling that story and comparing it to what those people did over there, which is press conferences, complaining, wasting our time with impeachment trials. But what did they do for real people in the real world? What did they do for any of the people that work here? They've done nothing. So I look forward to it. I'm excited about it.
I want to get to China and immigration, a lot of these policy fights. The other big thing I would ask you is, obviously ran for president in 2016. Is this something you're looking at again in 2024, beyond that, down the road?
Maybe.
Are you thinking about it?
Yeah, maybe, only because, first of all, I've ran for president before, so clearly I can't say, I'm never interested in that job. I think what happens over time is you learn, sometimes you're so focused on what's ahead that you don't focus on what's in front of you. So I think ultimately, if you do a good job at whatever your job is, it creates opportunities for you to do different things in the future, or to continue to do what you're doing in a better way. So one of the things I've grown to appreciate is I don't know what the world's going to look like, what the country's going to be looking for, what the party's going to be looking for, or what my personal circumstances are going to be in 2 or 4 years, And so maybe, I think there's a lot to be determined between now and then, but I got to focus on my job today that I have to do, and then 22, and then we'll see what 24. Here's the point. Could I? Sure, because I've run before, and if I see an opportunity to offer something that no one else is offering in that race, I'd consider it. But ultimately, I know I want to be in the U.S. Senate at least for another 6 years after this, because there's some things we have left to do, and that is, one of the main things is to ensure that in America we have a center-right party that fights on behalf of the men and women who work here 10, 12 hours a day, who own businesses like this, who fled socialism, who fled craziness in these other countries. and don't want to see the greatest country in the world destroyed and turned into, one of these countries that they came here to get away from. In the case of Nicaragua, these guys are being controlled by a Marxist, anti-American dictator. Yeah. And so when they hear some American politician talk about, oh, the governor of Florida is an authoritarian leader, they're like, what are these people talking? You guys are crazy, or what's wrong with you people?
Well, because they left authoritarianism
and that's the point.
They know what that really feels like.
That's the point. When you come and you live in Miami, you're surrounded by people that know what real lawlessness is, what real criminality is in government, what real corruption is, what real authoritarianism is, and what socialism really is, and what it really does to you. If it controls your money and it controls your business, it controls your life. And these people know that. And so for me, we don't have the luxury of entertaining these crazy thoughts, because everywhere I turn, I'm bumping into someone who knows the truth.
So tell us about that shift that we're seeing inside the Republican Party. We're seeing a debate play out in the wake of the Trump presidency. Obviously we saw Liz Cheney was removed from the House Conference chair position. We've seen, all sorts of these other personality battles, so on and so forth. But without getting into those specifics, what are the ideas that the Republican Party needs to embrace moving forward? You talk about the embracing the American worker. How do you do that? What are some of the things that you zone in on?
I think there's two fundamental overarching things. The first is we have a near-peer competitor in China, and the Chinese government, the entire government, is focused on one thing, and that is overtaking the United States as the world's most powerful country. By the year 2027, which will be the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army, they want to have parity with the United States militarily. They want to surpass us economically, technologically. They want to be the most powerful country in the world, and they're throwing everything at it. And we have been asleep at the switch up until the beginning of the Trump presidency. Everybody thought once China gets rich, they'll become like us. It didn't work out that way. They're seeking to replace us. So that overarches everything. In terms of within the party, there was a thinking for a long time that if a group of CEOs or finance people, who I don't hate or dislike any of them, they have a part to play in our economy, but if a bunch of them got together and came to Washington and said, we want you to pass this, that meant it was good for the economy, because they spoke for the economy. And I think there's this growing realization that just because it's good for them, and just because it's good for the corporation, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for Americans or America. It's not good for, it may be good for them to have a bunch of workers in another country. It's not good for America. It may be good for them to have their productive capacity somewhere else, or to depend on China for our medicines and our rare earth metals and all of that. Not good for America. So I think there's this growing acceptance that the economy, the free market, which we support, exists to serve people, not our people to serve the market. And then you've got to turn that into policies. And that's what the policies that we're talking about are. Yeah, we're free, 100% free enterprise. Socialism is a disaster. But when the free enterprise outcome is bad for America, our obligation is to America, not to the market. And our market is a tool to help America. And I think that's a shift that's tough for a lot of people that come from, like I did, traditional conservative economics that I think worked a lot better in that regard in the 80s than it does in a world where increasingly outcomes that are good for multinational corporations are not good for Americans. One of the things I think is really special about America is you can be 100% American, love this country. Some of the most patriotic lovers of this country are people that came from somewhere else because they know what it's like to live somewhere else, and yet not have to forfeit all this. Like America's a country that says, yeah, eat your food, come up with your slang words, have your restaurants and all that, but you're still 100% American. You're bought in. So it's this process of assimilation that's so powerful that's impossible in other societies and cultures. And it's frankly what I think some people want us to abandon. They want us to all kind of stay in these little silos and reject Americanism.
So, Senator, you're the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Speaking of China, this is obviously, I would argue, our biggest threat, and it really seems like the world has woken up to the threat of the Chinese Communist Party in the last few years. The Trump administration definitely did a lot to turn the tide on kind of awakening the Western world to this threat and what they're attempting to do. Can you just lay out for us, what are they actually doing? Like, what is the Chinese Communist Party's broad mission and goal? What are they trying to do? Why are they our greatest adversary?
Well, their mission and goal is pretty clear, and that is to emerge as the world's most powerful nation. They view the last 100 years as an aberration, and that they want to reclaim their rightful place in the world, in their mind, as the world's most powerful country, and they view it as a zero-sum game.
They view Beijing as the center of the world.
They view Beijing, and that's deep and cultural, but it used to be, they viewed themselves as the center of the world, but they were isolated. Now they don't intend to isolate, they intend to spread this all over the world. That's their goal. And then they've laid it out for us. They came up with a plan it's called Made in China 2025, and they laid out how they intend to dominate 10 key industries in the 21st century. And then what they do is they pour a bunch of money into companies favored by the state. There's no such thing as a Chinese corporation from our sense of the word. These are corporations that are allowed to be successful by the government, and they have to do what the government tell them. They pour a bunch of money into these companies. They give them exclusive access to their marketplace, and then we let them come here and do whatever they want as well. They invest in innovation and in technological advancement, but they also steal it from us. And they steal it not just by hacking, but by sending graduate students to steal the research, or by bribing. They literally will just pay an American researcher, hey, bring your research to China, we'll pay you. Even if that research sometimes was funded by the American taxpayer. That's what they're doing. And they've known how to play our system against us. So when you try to get tough on China, some corporation who's been allowed to do some business in China and has a 2% market share or has a factory there, they'll send their CEO to the White House to say, oh, we can't do this, it'll be bad for the economy. They operate, same with the universities, who make a lot of money off these graduate students that are paying full rate. Oh, we can't do this, we can't kick out the graduate students, even if they work for the army and the military of China. That's what they do. So the response to it is we have to wake up to this threat. We have to realize that there are some key industries in which government has to partner with the private sector if we want to make the kind of advance we need to make. That's what we did with the vaccine. We would have eventually had a vaccine, but we needed it now. And so government was able to incentivize the private sector to get to that outcome. We need to do that with quantum computing, with artificial intelligence, with telecom and 5G, with all of these important industries, pharmaceuticals. We can't keep buying 83% of our medicine from China. They cut us off, what do we do? And so, these are the kinds of things we really need to begin to focus on.
So we started kind of waking up to this during the Trump administration. I remember Secretary Pompeo going around and giving speeches around the country warning about their influence operations here. We started seeing reports about it. A lot of the people in Congress, I think, woke up to it. A lot of people in the media, I think, woke up to the threat of the Chinese Communist Party in a way that we weren't maybe back during the Obama administration. During the Biden administration now, in the first 100 or so days now that we've had President Biden, Democrat president, the Chinese Communist Party has increased their domestic their U.S. spending on influence operations 500%. I saw a report the other day to that effect. They sense weakness in the Biden administration.
They sense opportunity. They sense opportunity because the opportunity they sense is twofold. Number one is, unfortunately, these guys are really smart. Like, they really analyze and understand our politics a lot better than we understand theirs. And they realize we have a new administration, and this new administration is going to try to do everything opposite of what Donald Trump did. If Trump was for it, they want to be against it automatically. So that's what they sense. And so they're trying to take advantage of that. But they also are trying to take advantage of gaps in the system. So for example, right now, we're trying to do this China bill, which is good. I'm glad the Democrats and Republicans realize we got to do something.
This is the Endless Frontier Act,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and I think the general...
In theory, sounds great, right?
But here's the problem. Yeah. The problem is it pours all this money into research and development, but as of today, and I hope that'll change, it doesn't have safeguards in place to keep that from being stolen.
Right.
So if you're the Chinese...
Not to mention certain pork projects that some Democrat senators have maybe put in there with regard to their home states, right?
Yeah, so that poisons any bill, right? That poisons any bill. When you use it for some parochial thing, now it loses its sort of standing, and we can't have that. But imagine if you're China, you say, okay, so America's now going to spend $150 billion on research through universities that we already have our claws in. That's great. We'll just steal your go ahead and spend your money and we'll steal your research. We get it for free. So it's crazy. It's nuts. So that's the problem we're having, these things of that nature. And the reason why is because these universities have ins with the administration and are saying, hey, don't put a lot of restrictions on safeguards because it's going to slow down our research. Well, that's crazy. It would be faster for me to get on an airplane if I didn't have to go through TSA too. But we have to do it. So we have to have safeguards. So that's what they sense. And look, just a couple of days ago, we had a ban in place. The Trump administration had implemented a ban on investments in companies that had links to the Chinese military. In essence, companies that are building weapons to kill Americans one day in a future conflict, God forbid. They just suspended that. The Trump administration, the Biden administration. So you've just suspended a ban on American investment flowing into companies who are designing weapons to blow up our aircraft carriers. That's nuts.
That's absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. And the Chinese Communist Party, the rise of this threat, them sensing that opportunity that you're talking about, that's just one of many crises we're seeing here during the Biden administration. The other big thing we're seeing is the rising tensions, in a way that we haven't seen in years, between Hamas terrorists and the Israelis. What are your thoughts on what's playing out there? Because again, it seems like some of the weakness that we see with the Biden administration towards Iran, they're literally sitting with the Iranians in Geneva while this is going on, trying to negotiate another Iran deal, like the failed Obama Iran deal. What are your thoughts on what's playing out there?
I think two things are playing out. Number one is internal to Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Hamas wants to govern. They want to be the governing authority for all Palestinians in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. And so they view this as an opportunity to show strength and gain political advantage. They're the ones with the rockets. They're the ones that stood up to Israel. Palestinian Authority didn't. That's number one. So it's internal to them. The second is these people analyze this stuff, right? And they say, okay, we've got a new administration, and within the Democratic Party, there are people that are friendly to our argument about Israel being an apartheid state or whatever. So if we can provoke Israel into attacking us, and we'll put our missiles in civilian buildings, so civilians will die. We'll put our operations in a building full of the media, so the media can come after you. We can create a lot of negative blowback against Israel in the United States and internationally, and it will weaken Israel, and it will put Biden in a tough spot, because on the one hand, maybe he wants to be with Israel, but he's got these radical, pro-Hamas elements within his own party that are going to pressure him. That's how it's played out. That's exactly how it's played out. Hamas wants civilians to be killed. That's why they that's why they put rocket launchers right next to a hospital or a civilian apartment building. They want Israel to hit it. They want civilians to die, so that then the press coverage can be Israel's killing civilians. No one covers about how they are putting these people in harm's way, and no one says that under international law, a civilian facility being used to attack as a military installation is a legitimate target. And everyone falls for it, all mainstream media, international press corps, and what else is playing out in America right now is we now have multiple documented instances of pro-Palestinian mobs going after American Jews. In LA, in New York, an Orthodox gentleman was chased down the street by a mob. Where's the coverage? No coverage at all. Nobody even talks about that. It's barely being mentioned. So all these are the kinds of things they want to provoke. And last but not least, now Bernie Sanders has a resolution to suspend the sale, not the donation, the sale of weapons to Israel. His resolution will fail. But the fact that there's even going to be someone like Bernie Sanders, prominent, standing up and talking about it, they view weakens Israel.
An open socialist, by the way. So getting back to our earlier conversation about there being...
They all seem to be, and that's the thing that it's very funny. You have a lot of Democrats saying, well, I'm not a socialist. Bernie might be, but I'm not a socialist. Actually, Bernie's honest about it. I actually like Bernie Sanders. I don't like his politics, but he's an honest, straight guy. He's legitimate about what he believes in. He's not trying to hide it. These other people, I'm not a socialist, but you vote for all the socialist stuff. So and they're all interlinked. If you're there, you also happen to be anti-Israel. You also happen to believe America is the history of 240 years of horrible things, that this is the worst country in history. They're all part of the same club. You think they have one that replaced journalists? You don't have to worry yet. You don't have to worry yet. The thing is, I come up and talk to these people in Washington, and they're like, their whole opinion on what's happening in Honduras is based on what they read in the New York Times or some study. I'm like, I know people.
From a reporter who probably has never even been to Honduras.
Or maybe went,
right?
But they have their narrative, right? And I just talked to, I know people from Honduras. They'll tell you flat out, yeah, I have relatives in Honduras, and some trafficking group came up to them and said, hey, got a new president in America. You can come in. It's easy. Just bring some kids with you. And then these people get raped, sexually assaulted, killed, abused, abandoned on that terrible trip, and we've incentivized it. We basically passed a stimulus package for human traffickers, but by the message we send out. And the first thing these guys from Honduras will tell you, how are we going to build a country if all our young people leave?
The last thing I want to talk to you about here is the border crisis we're seeing during the Biden administration here, where they got rid of the Remain in Mexico policy that President Trump had negotiated with the Mexican government. They got rid of the various deals with the Northern Triangle countries that President Trump had put together. We've seen them return to the catch and release policies and the failures of the Obama administration. What are your thoughts on how do we address this? I mean, one of the things we saw from talking to people walking around here, you know, there were folks from Nicaragua, folks from Honduras, here, right here in Sergio's. But how do we address the border crisis? What do we do to solve this once and for all?
I always chuckle when I get lectured about Central America and what's driving migration here by people that have never been there and don't know anyone from there. It's what they read in some magazine or what some activist told them. I deal with people every day. This is a great example of the death of common sense on the left, okay? Human beings respond to incentives all the time. It's the reason why people lower their prices for something. It's the reason why why we have traffic tickets. Human beings respond to incentives, positive and negative, okay? If you tell people there's a new president, he's not going to be as tough on immigration as the previous president. We don't want you to come, but if you come with a child, you're going to get to stay pending a hearing 2 years from now. You created an incentive. You created an incentive. And let me tell you, I get it. For a lot of these people living in Honduras and Guatemala, there's violence, there's criminality, there's poverty, there's desperation, COVID added to all that. I understand all that. I don't think the answer to that is to lure these people into the hands of these human trafficking networks who will sexually assault women, abuse children, kill you, sell you from one trafficking network to the next, all so they can come to the US border and then cross in illegally. Now in this country, illegally. That's not helping people whatsoever, and that's what they've done. That's what their policies have done. So you can't create a policy that basically incentivizes people to come and to bring children or send children and then expect it not to happen. And that's what they've done. And that's exactly what they've done. And it's unfortunate that there isn't some balanced coverage in this country, but it's amazing how many people in the real world, including people from Honduras and Guatemala, get it. Despite what the mainstream media is saying, they have the common sense to see through all that disinformation and know what's really behind it. The problem Biden has is, the only way to solve this problem is to go back to doing what President Trump had done in regards to it. And he can't possibly do that politically. So he's in a trap.
Senator, really want to thank you for taking the time to join us here. Look forward to talking again down the road.
Absolutely. No, thanks for coming down to do this. It's been fun.